Okay, excellent. Okay, let's get going. Is everybody enjoying climate change and the drought? Great. Oh, works better when you turn it on. So let's talk a little bit about last Thursday's lecture with Debbie Kenny. We got a lot of good comments from your evaluation forums. How many people have seen a person who's had a stroke before last Thursday? Oh, okay, great. So it wasn't new to a lot of people. But does anybody have any comments they'd like to share about that session and all the equipment and stuff? Nobody? You got to learn to speak up. Well, a lot of comments were that I got were about the variety of equipment, and a lot of people were surprised that that insurance didn't pay for it all. Actually, Medicare has some very restrictive rules, and you can't always get what you want. So it's important to know that. So we got our, excuse me? Oh. Well, I was playing the Rolling Stones, so yeah. So everybody, we got our sign-up sheet again, attendance sheet, and evaluation forms. We'll have a little bit of a break before we bring on the student group, so that would be your opportunity to sign in if you haven't done so. And we got a couple of new forms. Oh, this is so exciting. This is the Meet with Dave form, because I know it's so hard for students sometimes to email me. So here's a way you can just sign up for this Wednesday until next Wednesday. So these are for 15 minutes segments, and this would these are for project teams reporting weekly. Instead of writing me a progress report, you can meet with me as a team, so that'll be a lot easier for you. And for students who have missed a lecture and want to meet with me to talk about the missed lecture, that would be great. So that's this form, and I'll leave it up here and you can sign in later. This is a very important one. Remember on Thursday, the driver signed up if they have cars available. Well, this is the one for passengers. So if you want to be a passenger for one of these drivers for next Tuesday, when we're going to the Magical Bridge Playground, this is where to sign up. So I'll just pass that around, and hopefully we'll have enough cars for everybody. And also let me know if you're going in your own car, so I can make sure that everybody has a means of getting there. So that's that form. There'll be so we'll be meeting. This will happen during class time. We'll be meeting right outside by Santa Teresa. All the cars will be lined up there. So I'm going to be sending out information to each driver and each passenger, so they know who to meet and what the color of the car is and what the driver looks like. So we haven't lost anybody yet. So it's gonna work out. If you sign up and for some reason can't make it, please let me know, because I don't want to be searching for you or calling for you at the last minute wondering where you are. So be sure to get here on time, because we don't want, it takes a little bit of time to drive there, and I know you want to spend as much time in the playground as possible. Okay. For those who need to come back early, we can arrange an early return, so just let me know about that. Okay, somebody asked in their evaluation form, what is the process for how users find and buy assistive technology? So Debbie very kindly wrote a whole one-page reply, which I put online, and this is what Debbie looked back in the 80s, so when we worked together, so that was a long time ago. Again, I want to repeat this, that you should be really working every week on your team, making progress, because the quarter is short, there's a lot to do, and we don't want you to wait until the last 2 weeks to do everything. That's a big mistake. So this is from me, and this is from last year's students. I asked last year's students at the end of the quarter what advice they would give to you, these students. And so there was a lot of students, and I'm not going to bother reading through all these, but they'll be online. And I have a summary slide, and a lot of it is like, start early. So this is if you don't believe me, you can believe last year's students, okay? If it makes more sense. So we had lots of students last year. So in summary, from all these slides, start early, be engaged, don't wait in the last couple weeks to prototype, focus on time management, make lots of prototypes early and often, including paper models. Make sure that the entire team is involved, and be assertive if a team member isn't involved. You need to communicate constantly and share each other's strengths, weaknesses, and apprehension. Get feedback and ideas from a lot of people, not just the suggester, but maybe the community members in the audience and other folks. You need to understand, if you're working with new technology, you need to understand what it can do. You need to seek help. You can't do it alone. There's lots of other people with a lot of experience that can help you out, make life easier for you, and I'm sure you're all for easier, right? Meet and test the prototype with users as often as you can for each prototype you work on. Even if it doesn't work, show it to the user. You'll get a lot of good feedback on how to proceed. Employ all the resources, including me and the project resource people I told you about, and also the TAs in the PRL in room 36. And if you meet there and work on your project there, then you can show them what you've worked on and get some immediate feedback on what you're doing. Think about lots of ideas, don't hold them back. Everybody has different needs and perspectives as far as the team and people with disabilities. Be open and adaptable. It's a bad situation if somebody on your team is very strong-minded and wants his or her own way. It's hard to deal with that. So keep an open mind. It'll make your job easier. So listen to what your teammates have to say. This is very important. Each person on the team should know what they're responsible for and when it's going to be due. And so there's going to be a little bit of team management here in figuring out who's going to do what and when it's due. And as I said, you have to fully understand the problem in order to be successful. The process is full of iterations and trial and errors and failures. So if you don't make it the first time, you're going to learn something for the next time you prototype something. You need to, in most cases, there is a simple solution. It doesn't always have to be high tech. And aesthetics matter, because if you're going to build a device for somebody to use, they would really want to be able to use it. They want to identify it with it and have it customizable or personalized so that they can feel that it's a part of them. And hopefully everybody's picked up a project that you'll have fun working on. That's really important. Okay. So yesterday was Martin Luther King Day, and I know you students probably weren't around when Martin Luther King was around, but I've taken one of his famous quotes. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So what does that mean? I mean, it sounds nice, but what does it really mean? Who has an opinion? Tell me what this statement means to you personally, or sort of dissect it.
Well, being able to consider each person as a human being.
Okay. So he wasn't just talking about his 4 kids, was he? He was talking about everybody. So he was just using that as an analogy. So not being judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of the character. So what does that mean? What is important about a person according to Martin Luther King? It's about who they are and what they do, okay? I mean, you could be, everybody has something to contribute. That's what I like to say. And by the color of their skin, he didn't want to, so he's saying here that he wants to see a world where his children, and by extension everybody, would live in a world of equality. And we talk about content of character, and people with disabilities have content of character and can contribute as well. So, we can take the statement and it can apply to older adults and people with disabilities as well, in my mind, because I have a poetic license and I can do things like that. Okay. Anybody have any comments about that? Okay, it's important. So, how many people have been to a Maker Faire in the area? Wasn't that a lot of fun? And I always go on the day that Adam Savage talks. How many people are familiar with Mythbusters and watch it on TV? It's a great show. And so what he has to do in the show is, build something and make something. And they go through a lot of prototypes. And so this past May, he had a really interesting talk that I want to share with you because it can apply to exactly what you're doing on your team. Come on. Here we go. Sorry about that. So I'm standing over here someplace.
It's an inception, and it gets bigger every year and more awesome every year. Look, most years I've come with somewhat of a prepared talk and then kind of winged it. This year I was thinking, what could I talk about? And I thought, well, what about lists? Humans have loved lists since Moses. So I thought, maybe 10 commandments of making. I wanted to talk about 10 commandments of making. And so I wrote them down. I came up with 9, unfortunately. Things never quite turn out the way that you planned. But in the end, on my way down, I came up with the 10. So finally, I have a list of 10 solid things that I would have loved someone to tell me when I first started burning and cutting myself in order to have the things that I needed to have. The first rule of making, I will say, is make something. Anything. Cook, weld, carve, sculpt, anything that you need to make. It's important that you make it. Humans do 2 things that make us unique from all other animals. We use tools and we tell stories. And when you make something, you're doing both at once. You're telling a story about your desire, you're telling a story about something that you want, you're telling a story about something that you see needs to be made, and you are using your tools to improve yourself and improve the world around you. When you make new things, you are joining in the most ancient dialogue that humans have ever had. So, commandment the first, make something, make anything. It may feel like it's totally insignificant, but it's vital that you do it. Number 2, make something occasionally that actually improves your life. from a toilet
Or
paper
somebody
holder
else's life.
that actually works to a toaster that's slightly improved. When you make something that you use every day as opposed to something that's useless, I can't even tell you how good it feels. Even like a handle on a drawer. You make a handle on a drawer and you're using it every single day. The patina of your use that it gets feels really good. Again, and it's another story. Okay, here's one. There's a million different skills being displayed out here. And I'm sure a lot of you are walking around and thinking, I wish I could do that. I wish I had that skill. Several of these commandments have to do with skills. The thing is that a lot of times we stop ourselves from moving forward with a project because we don't know how to weld or we don't know carpentry. And my advice is, start now. Start right now to do the thing that you want to do.
Wait till after class.
Right, and do it with the things in front of you. If you want to weld a car frame but you don't have a welder or a car or a frame, go ahead and mock it up out of oak tag and cardboard. There's a beautiful sculptor here in the basement who made himself a 747 out of manila file folders. One of the loveliest things I've ever seen. 4, yes. I can't learn any skills unless I have a project to learn with. I need a goal. I need something. Well, it's like I need something. I need the thing that I'm trying to attain. I can't learn to weld just by someone showing me that it should sound like frying eggs and you set the dials like this. I need to end up with Wolverine claws or a sword or a pair of stilts or something like that. Always try to find a project that will get you interested in the thing that you want to build. Almost halfway there. 5. Ask questions. Ask for help. Ask for advice. Ask for feedback. You'll find when you make stuff that it actually kind of makes you vulnerable to ask for feedback because it totally does. But if you find someone you trust, ask for advice. And when you find someone you trust, ask for feedback. I'll tell you, it's very funny among adults. We rarely actually turn to each other and say, what do you think of the work that I'm doing? And it's because that places us in a very vulnerable spot. But again, if you can find a teacher or a mentor or someone whose opinion you really respect, asking them very specifically about how they think you're doing can give you incredible insight. I've done it a few times in my life, and every single time I've gotten a tremendous perspective on what I was actually doing. Share. Now there's a lot of talk about the sharing economy. I'm sure Etsy is totally present here at Maker Faire. And we trade stuff and we trade knowledge. That is really, really important. There is nothing that makes me angrier when somebody does something beautiful and you ask how it's done and they say it's a secret. No secrets. What are you protecting? Nobody's going to take your technique and then steal your idea. Nobody has a monopoly on being you. And if you think that your technique is what makes you interesting, you're being ridiculous. So share your techniques, because when you do, someone's going to come back to you with a better way of doing it. You're going to learn something from them. 7, please recognize that discouragement and failure are part of every single make project. Not something that happens every now and then. In every single project, you will find yourself discouraged and you will fail at some point. If you recognize that, boy, these balcony railings are terrifying. If you recognize that you're going to fail, at least when it's about to happen, when you are getting discouraged because you hit a snag and you don't have a part and it's Sunday night and it's 4 a.m., at least then you know that that's part of what's going to happen, and that the next morning it may be a little harder to get started, but if you know that mechanism, you can actually keep going. I personally, and I've said this many times before, whenever I'm making something, about 70% of the way in, I actually think I have no idea what I'm doing and I hate what I'm building. And Fellini even said that he knows that one of his films is almost finished when he totally despises it. And frankly, that 70, 80, 90% mark, the closer you get to the end, the more scared I get. Because it turns out that I hate finishing things. I'd much rather keep working on them and keep getting that endorphin rush of the eBay research and finding that part that I didn't know existed. getting all the way to the end is a little bit difficult. But if you recognize what your mechanism is, where the places you'll get frustrated, they are your friends. You can welcome them in. This is also part of mindfulness and meditation. Understand that those thoughts are going to happen and embrace them. Look, they still are going to suck. I'm not going to lie to you. It sucks to fail. It hurts to cut yourself. But it's going to happen in every single project. 8. Measure carefully. Measure carefully. So, for the younger builders in the audience, when you have two things that fit tightly together, that's called a close tolerance. When you have two things that fit loosely together, that is a loose tolerance. Knowing the prioritization, knowing when to use a tight tolerance and a loose tolerance is pretty much everything that separates the expert from the novice. I have messed up so many projects. Even 3 days ago, I screwed up a project because I tried to work with tolerances that were too tight. It's just, you have to know where you can be tight and where you can be loose. Measuring carefully is the way you do that. Number 9, make things for other people. I can't even describe to you how much pleasure I get when I make something and then I give it to somebody else and they get a story, they get the thing that I've made, they get the fruit of a couple of hours of my time and concentration, and they get to possess it. It does make you vulnerable when you give your stuff away. You should recognize that. Giving your stuff away does actually place you in a slightly vulnerable position, but it is also a really magical one. So occasionally when you're making stuff, give it away. Give it to other people. Number 10. Now, if I could go back in time, in a time machine, and tell my young self one thing about making that I really wish I'd known at the beginning, I would have saved a lot of money, time, and hurt bent fingers. The last commandment, use more cooling fluid. Yes, cold metal cuts much better than hot metal. Those are my 10 commandments of making good. I love Maker Faire. See you guys next year.
Yeah. Do you agree that's relevant? I mean, it's almost uncanny how relevant it is. So let's look back at some of the stuff. Adam always says that failure is always an option, but you learn from failure, so it should be, you should expect it and welcome it, and then move beyond it because you're learning something. Okay. So that's good. So on Thursday, I'm going to be talking about antique technology because that was one of the things that got most requested on your evaluation form. So stand by for that. Again, I want to mention that if you haven't done so already, you need to go over to the PRL, get your safety orientation, buy your shop pass, because that's your admission into starting the process of making things. I also want to talk about this Aging in Place meetup tomorrow on University Avenue, and there's going to be a guy bringing one of these Beam telepresence devices, and he's going to be promoting it as a way to visit remote people without having to be there, and that remote person could be like a family member or a person with a disability. So that'll be pretty interesting. So if you can make it, it's just down the street. So on Thursday is going to be another awesome lecture, and I know this because we did it last year. Catherine Strasser from Exobionics is going to be bringing an exoskeleton, and Fernanda is going to be test piloting it. And so be prepared to be wowed, okay? So that's next week. So, but today we're going to have a panel of Stanford students and recent graduated student talk about themselves and their disability. So we'll have a little break right now. So now's your chance to sign up if you haven't, and we're going to rearrange the seats and stuff like that. So just about maybe 3 minutes. I want you to get her on time. grab a form? Eric. So okay for you to work on the Magical Bridge Playground project? It'll be a lot of fun.
I want to do it, but do you think I can do it as a team project solo?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, we'll just scale it. So,
Scale it?
yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's my prediction.
Okay. All right.
I haven't talked to them.
Well, we're going to be there on Tuesday, but you can talk to her and tell her. Okay.
Is there a group doing an orthopedic one with
Yeah.
Burke?
Yeah.
Which group is it?
I don't know their names right now. Come on down.
Are we supposed to put on the assistive technology now? I wanted to leave at the end so it's not distracting and to post the pictures.
No, you demonstrate it at the end. So you talk first and then demonstrate it after.
There?
Sure. Yeah.
Will we be back on time to do this?
Oh, yeah. No.
Probably not.
No.
So I'll scratch out our name.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Will you be holding meeting times after Thursday?
Sure.
Could I write back?
Well, we're going to be driving back from the playground, so.
No, for Thursday. You're saying next week.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just don't have it on here. But you can email me. Okay, have a seat.
If we're here, then do we walk back here?
You can either do it from the chair or from the podium or standing, whatever you feel more comfortable. Most
But I'm just wondering, I like to move. And
That's fine.
personally.
So you're not going to need a chair, so I'll take one away.
No, I want to sit, but like when I'm presenting.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, you can stand over here and walk around. Okay, we need a Kartik down here. Grab a seat up front. Okay, Kartik. Here I am. Step. One more series of steps. Okay.
More space to walk around for those who prefer.
Excellent.
They'll walk a bit more.
Okay. So, where's? Yeah. Let me get this chair over here. Oh, so here's a chair right here, and you're sitting next to Dan. Okay. And I'm going to switch. Okay. Okay. Am I still on? Okay. Okay. So we got some students here, and Aubrey's been involved in the class for many years, and Kartik was in the class last year, and there are some new students this year. So Kartik, is it okay to start with you? Okay, I have a microphone for you to hold on to.
Okay.
Not so close.
Oh, okay. Is that
Okay,
better?
go ahead.
Okay, cool. So hello everyone. I'm Karthik, and I'm a sophomore here majoring in computer science. And today I'll be starting off with, so I start off with, my journey. So my elementary school, high school, and then finally I'll talk about the accommodations that I get here as a student here at Stanford and the assistive technology that I use. So to get started, I was born in Delhi, India, and that is where I've completed most of my education. So I completed my high school back in India. And I started off at a special school where I was basically trained in blindness-specific skills. For instance, orientation and mobility, braille, assistive technology, etc. The school had a mainstream program basically where they would integrate you into mainstream schools. And so in grade 1, I was mainstreamed. And those first few days were really challenging because there were two things. Like, firstly, the teachers did not know how to teach me because I was the first blind student in that school. And also, I'd never really studied with other students, like non-disabled students, and the entire experience was so different that it took me a while to adjust. But then fortunately, the teachers were good enough, got a lot of support from the school. And by grade 2, I realized that working on Braille was problematic because my school did not have a special teacher for the visually impaired, and so my mother had to transcribe everything that I wrote in Braille. And that is when I decided that I needed to be more independent, and I switched completely to a computer. So I started using a screen reader, which is basically a software that reads out whatever is there on the monitor. So that's how a blind student can know what you're currently working on, what's up on the monitor, be it like start menu, or if you're browsing, or for that matter, even if you're programming or whatnot, it reads out everything to you. And I started taking exams also on the computer using the same assistive technology. And by that time, I started participating in pretty much all the activities, from like, I don't know, computer quizzes, debates, and a whole lot of other activities, to activities including like, drawing and painting, which, to think about it in the first go, would be like, hey, how can a blind student ever draw? That's just impossible. But then we worked out accommodations, we worked out different ways in which I could have pretty much the same experience as my other peers. In grade 6, I moved on to the senior school, which was colossal. Like, it had almost like 12,000 students. and I was like, oh my God, like, this is like, where do I start here? Like, how would I get all the accommodations? But again, the teachers were good enough and everything just worked out. In grade 7, there were a few new admits in my class, and these were people who were really interested in science, technology, and computer science, and they really motivated me. So this was basically a group of 5 friends. We would sit together in the library and read books on like ethical hacking and and everything, like computer programming and. By grade 9 or so, we actually came up with this software that replaced our school's current enrollment management system. And that is when I decided I wanted to study computer science, and I was really passionate about science. Started participating in a number of Olympiads and other competitive exams. And fortunately did pretty well. That was also very inspiring and motivating that, yeah, it was possible for someone who's blind to actually pursue science and excel at it. Everything was as ideal as it could be until the 10th grade, when in India, we're supposed to choose an educational track or stream for the rest of our high school. I was pretty confident about my choice. It had to be sciences. I was so passionate about it. But there's a central board in the country that basically has this mandate of approving everything related to education, all rules and regulations. They lay down the norms. And at that time, there was this rule that blind students cannot study science. So they can only study subjects like history, political science, or other humanities-based subjects, which is kind of really disappointing. And it took me almost 9 months and like almost, I think, 40 letters to the chairman, 2 demonstrations, just to demonstrate like how I use my assistive technology and why I think I'll be able to manage everything. And after 9 months, finally, they issued this circular that allowed all blind students in India to pursue sciences, and in grades 11 and 12, and also provided a few accommodations that would have enabled students with disabilities, particularly those who are blind and visually impaired, to take on these subjects. But this was only like one small hurdle that I was able to get through. And a bigger challenge was when I finally enrolled in science stream. Being the first blind student in India to have taken this subject, there was no one to look up to. There were no role models. And more importantly, there was no material in accessible formats. In India, we do not use e-books. So I pretty much had to rely on someone to dictate content to me, and I would type it on my computer. And then just so I could refer to the material again in the future. And so every day used to be like, an hour's worth of typing or 2 hours worth of typing. My mother used to dictate material and I would type it. And only after typing this material would I start actually studying that material. And what made it more complicated was that I actually enrolled in a coaching program. So in India, we have something known as the Indian Institutes of Technology, which are like India's MIT, Stanford, the most prestigious tech schools. And like every other science student, I had this dream of making it to those IITs. And so I enrolled in this coaching program for the entrance examination to these institutes, which was really rigorous. Like they had almost 60 textbooks that you would have to refer to every year. And so what that meant was, well, I was not only typing the school textbook, but also these textbooks. Another big challenge was like, how do I understand diagrams and graphs? Things were okay until the 10th grade when the diagrams were not that complicated. But then now what? Like you're actually studying science. It's kind of like a specialization because you've taken that educational track or stream, so to say. And it was pretty hard actually. We did not have access to embossers, and so I had to rely on people to describe diagrams to me. Fortunately, by that time I developed the skill of understanding or being able to visualize diagrams simply from verbal descriptions of those diagrams. But even then, there were often these really complicated structures that I had no idea how to handle. I remember once I was sitting in this calculus class and the professor or the teacher actually drew this really complicated graph on the board and I had no idea what was going on. And that is when I thought, well, I might as well change my stream. I might switch to like commerce or humanities because, well, the people might have been right. It's probably not for a blind student. Science is not for a blind student probably. But then, the very next moment, I was like, well, no, I'm not going to lose my passion that easily. I'm not going to let go of it. And then I used my programming knowledge, developed this software which uses 21 frequencies, and using the variation in these frequencies gives you an idea of how a graph is laid out. So if a graph is increasing, it's denoted by an increase in the frequency. If a graph is decreasing, it's denoted by a decrease in frequency, and so on and so forth, and their combinations. So it gave me a very good idea about the monotonicity of the curve. Similarly, for chemistry and physics, I worked with my teachers and developed conventions that would have enabled me to represent, something like organic chemistry molecules on the computer without really drawing them. Or things like free body diagrams or electric circuits on a computer. And fortunately, we were able to actually work out most of this, to figure out ways in which I could do this. Everything was going really well until August 2012, August 2012, when I received this letter from the IITs saying that, well, even if you qualify our entrance examination, well, we're not going to take you in just because you're blind. And we don't think that you'll be able to manage the classes here are really rigorous. And again, well, that was kind of illegal, right? I mean, you cannot just discriminate on grounds of disability. So I reached out to them. Finally, they're like, oh, okay, fine. We'll allow you to take the exam, but then we will not provide you any reasonable accommodations that you need to take the exam. And what that meant was, well, they were giving me a person who's never studied science before, so a person from the commerce without mathematics or humanities stream, to read out the exam to me. And that was actually really problematic because science, as you all know, is full of these technical symbols, Latin and Greek alphabet that represent various physical quantities. So a person who's never seen this, how would he ever read out the exam to me? Further, you're not allowing me the use of any assistive technology. That was another challenge. I still tried to convince them somehow for almost like a month, and a half, 2 months. And by the way, this IIT thing had been going on for a very long time. I've been writing letters to them ever since I actually enrolled in grade 11. Finally, I think it was October 2012 when I actually got this really rude comment from one of the senior officials at one of the IITs, which actually made me rethink, if they have this kind of an attitude right now, even if I make it to the institute, I'm not being able to get any accommodations that I need. What's the point? What's the point of wasting my 4 years and just struggling to get my textbooks in accessible formats? That is when I decided to look at international admissions. And I have an aunt who lives pretty close to Stanford, and she's like, hey, why don't you try out American schools? I'm like, oh, there's no way I'm getting accepted. And secondly, like my parents are not letting me go to America. It's like I've never lived alone my entire life. But finally, when I realized that nothing was working out here, I was like, oh, I might as well apply. It took me a while to convince my parents because they were like, there's no way you're going to the US, no way. And then finally, I did apply. I took my SAT as late as January, and though the deadline for Stanford is December. So I wasn't even sure if my application would be reviewed. But finally, fortunately, I got here, and I'm a sophomore here right now. And things are really different here at Stanford. We have something known as the Office of Accessible Education, or the OAE. The sole purpose of which is to ensure that students with disabilities receive accommodations, receive their documents in accessible formats, just to ensure that, so disability does not prove to be a hindrance in any way possible. So I get all of my textbooks in a timely fashion. I obviously do not have to type any of my textbooks anymore, which is really, really comforting. Can request lab assistance, library assistance, can also request tactile diagrams wherever I feel that the diagram is a bit too complicated for someone to describe to me or I'm not being able to understand it. And more than that, I think the biggest thing is the attitude of the people. Though I would say that, well, there's certainly scope for improvement here, even here in the United States, but certainly people seem to be much more sensitive. It's more like, a rights-based approach here in the US as opposed to more like a charity-based approach, which unfortunately exists even today in several developing countries, which is really nice. So yeah, it's just like a different world, and I'm glad to be here. But at the same time, I hope that things improve even more, and to the point where people with disabilities are absolutely mainstreamed into the society and are not viewed as like any separate class altogether at all. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karthik. Okay. Aubrey, you're next. Oh, so good to see you.
All right. I've given many variations of this talk before, so I hope that it has not gotten worse over time. But I recently graduated from Stanford. In June, studied engineering and played med. My disability is a rare kind of muscular dystrophy, and the main deal with muscular dystrophy is that when someone who does not have muscular dystrophy exercises or uses their muscles, those muscles get stronger. But when I use my muscles, they get weaker. So about every year, I lose some muscle function. And this past year, 1 year ago, I was talking in this class, I had full function of my left hand, but this year, I'm starting to lose extension in my left hand. I'm actually right-handed, but because of that, I have used my right hand over time more, and so it's much weaker than my left hand at this point. I started using a wheelchair around age 14. I would at first only use a scooter or a manual chair at large spaces like theme parks, but I transitioned to using a scooter at school in 8th grade. I was still walking at home, and then by the age of 16 or so, I was using a chair both at school and at home. And the chair that I use at home is quite different from this one. It is maybe what you might think of when you hear a power chair. It's larger and it's controlled with a joystick. There are many reasons why I like to use those two different chairs in different contexts. The main idea is that different manifestations of technology can customize for different situations, different environments. Other parts other implications of my disability are that I am hard of hearing. So if you watch a movie with me, we're going to put on the subtitles. I am also unable to smile or close my lips voluntarily. So sometimes people have trouble understanding my speech at first. And I would hope that people don't have too much trouble understanding my emotions. But I feel that that is probably my least accommodating disability, is showing my emotions. So I try to compensate by varying the tone of my voice or changing the angle of my face. But overall, those are the symptoms of my disability. And there's a lot more that I can say, but I want to make sure I leave time for others.
Zena, you're next. Sorry. Okay, this one, yeah.
كنت كركوت آخر مرة شفتك من زمان. One of my Iraqi aunts whom I had not met before said this to me when I was 11 years old. I responded, "Sorry, can you speak English? I don't understand Arabic well." She nosily asked, "Why don't you speak Arabic?" My mother jumped in and explained that I had serious hearing loss and that it took me more than 7 years of intensive speech therapy just to learn English. My aunt gasped and said, "Khateya." "Thank you," I said, assuming Khateya was an Arabic mazel tov, or good thing. From that moment on, I was delighted when my family and friends praised me with Khateya, which they did often. In fact, over the years, Khateya has become my source of motivation to overcome obstacles. My name is Zena Jawadi, and I am currently a freshman at Stanford. Although I am hearing impaired, I have been mainstream my entire life. In other words, I have been, for the majority of my life, I was the only hearing impaired student in my entire school. Because of my hearing loss, I developed skills that help me not only survive, but thrive in a mainstream school with hearing students. For example, hearing loss taught me responsibility and agility. As a 5-year-old, I had to continuously manage all my hearing devices, 2 hearing aids, tiny batteries, an FM system, etc. Thousands of dollars of uninsured items. Additionally, there were several technologies that have contributed to my success. Today, I will explain how the FM system, captioning, and how hearing aids work, and share personal anecdotes about my experience with each. Let's begin with the FM system. The FM system is a device typically worn by teachers in the classroom and is used in conjunction with hearing aids. The device picks up the teacher's voice and transmits it directly to the hearing aids through pegs that attach to the hearing aids. To my ears, the FM system sounds like a microphone. While I don't use an FM system anymore, for many years, the FM system was beneficial and even amusing at times. Once in first grade, I walked to the restroom almost 50 feet away from the classroom, and suddenly I heard my teacher have a private conversation with one of the students. Needless to say, I quickly turned off the FM system. So we just talked about the FM system. Now let's discuss captioning. Stanford is incredibly accommodating to people with hearing loss. For example, Stanford's Office of Accessible Education, or OAE, provides me captioning in all classes and events. At Stanford, I have been using virtual captioning, which is pretty cool. The professor puts on the Bluetooth, that's right here. This Bluetooth clip transmits the professor's voice for a captioner in San Diego. The captioner then transcribes what is being said. As the captioner types, I see the captions through Google Hangout in my iPad. Surprisingly, it has been easier for me to hear in large lectures because the classes are equipped for people to be able to hear in the back. Furthermore, most lecturers use microphones, which are easier for me to hear. Assistive technology has empowered me in the classroom. However, if I am able to hear without assistive technology, I prefer not to use any. Now let's discuss how a hearing aid works. A hearing aid consists of a tiny microphone, an amplifier, a processor, and a battery. The microphone receives the sounds and converts them into electrical pulses. The processor decides what sounds should be magnified and by how much. The amplifier then magnifies these pulses, and the battery is the power source. Most people think that hearing aids correct hearing loss like eyeglasses do for eyes. Sadly, that is not the case at all. A normal ear selects meaningful sounds and filters out uninteresting ones. This is done automatically under the brain's control. Hearing aids, on the other hand, amplify all sounds and voices indiscriminately. With hearing aids, noise often becomes louder than the conversation. And in addition, a hearing aid can cost thousands of dollars, excluding batteries and repairs. According to the CDC, the lifetime cost per person with severe to profound hearing loss exceeds $1 million. Now, as I mentioned earlier, hearing aids are fragile, expensive, and not covered by health insurance. Additionally, they're uncomfortable and unstylish. So what child wants to wear these things? So, perhaps it was my frustration with hearing aids that I accidentally dropped my hearing aids near the gate at my house, resulting in a state of frenzy. And the climax was in second grade when the hearing aids truly unintentionally fell on the floor and the garage and were driven over by my mother. My father gave me the look of someone who just lost $8,000. So we just have discussed assistive technologies that enhance communication and improve listening quality. However, people with hearing loss often have safety concerns, such as being able to hear fire alarms. Stanford's Office of Accessible Education has installed a fire alarm in my dorm that flashes light just in case I can't hear the sound of the fire alarm, which honestly is piercingly loud. Stanford also gave me a shaker alarm so that I can feel the vibrations to wake up. Despite the ear doctor's predictions that I would never speak normally, ironically, I found my calling in a public speaking tournament where I spoke about hearing aids. Since then, I've been steeped in hearing science, hearing loss, and disability rights. I'm incredibly fortunate to have precociously started pursuing my passion since 8th grade. During the summer between my sophomore and junior year, I discovered the Hearing Loss Association of America, or HLAA. HLAA is the largest national nonprofit organization for people with hearing loss. As officer and board member of HLAA California State Association, I have been blessed with many opportunities to provide support and advocacy for people with hearing loss. If you are interested in technology and pretty much especially for people with hearing loss, the best place is the HLAA convention, where manufacturers of almost every hearing assistive technology exhibit cochlear implants, hearing aids, looping, amplified headphones that can be personalized for someone's hearing loss, T-coil amplification for the hearing aid, caption phones, and so much more. So today we discussed the various hearing assistive technologies that I have personally used. Now when I started, I mentioned all the khatiyas that everyone showered me with when I was a child. And I always assumed that it meant you were doing great despite the odds. In fact, I started encouraging others with khatiyah myself. One day, my family and I were in a wedding, and I enthusiastically shouted, "Khatiyah!" to the bride and groom. My mother pulled me aside and said, "Zina, you realize khatiyah means poor thing, right?" Unfortunately, as I have discovered over the years, khatiyah, or pity for people with disabilities, is an international phenomenon. Yet I believe my life represents what I previously thought khatiyah meant, an Arabic version of mazel tov. Ear experts would not have expected me to be where I am today. And so I am proud to still embrace my childhood's perception of khatiyah, pitiless disability, and limitless destiny. Mazel tov.
Dylan, you're next.
Hi, my name's Dylan, but most people call me Bobby, and I'm a freshman at Stanford from London. I haven't actually been disabled for very long. In May of last year, I had quite a nasty accident which left me with permanent nerve damage in my right arm and my right leg. And it's officially called peripheral nerve palsy. And what that sort of means is that I have very limited sensation and movement in my right arm, and my right hand in particular, and also no feeling really in my right leg. So I guess the best analogy for that is, you know, when you're sitting with your legs crossed, your leg falls asleep, and it's like having that all the time, and sort of similar with your hand. And so this means that I can't hold a pen to write or grip things, and there's also variable pain levels between moderate and severe, which can sort of impact the way you do your day-to-day life. And I was pretty nervous when I first came to Stanford because I only got out of the hospital a couple of months before getting here, and so I'd never been in education disabled before, and I wasn't sure like what the accommodations or what the effects would be. But like as everyone said so far, the OE at Stanford is incredibly accommodating. So some of the technologies I used include speech recognition for more my writing. I use Scribe to my exams, and for the days where I can sort of use my hands a bit, I have an adaptive keyboard. They've also been good about giving me accommodation on the floor, so I don't have to climb stairs, and arranging like elevators and sort of ways of transport. I also use the Stanford service Disco, which means that they have a golf cart that sort of drives you around. Other than that, because like a lot of it's sort of to do with pain and movement as opposed to like having one specific problem, a lot of my accommodations are sort of dealing with each situation they arise, as opposed to one technology that's sort of a coverall. So, for example, a lot of it involves like clothes that don't have buttons, or not living far, like or living close by to where I need to go, and just generally adjusting the way I live and like my lifestyle towards the limitations. I guess another big impact it had is before I got to Stanford, I was a pre-professional musician. I played 3 instruments, and that was sort of what I was going to do with my life. But obviously, without motor skills in your hand, that becomes much more difficult. And so it's been definitely a vision of what I want to do, and oddly also a direction, though, because I've become very interested in assistive technology and in helping people, and in looking at the effect technology can sort of have. One sec. One of the most things I found sort of the more challenging is that my disability is almost completely invisible unless you know it's there. I mean, once you know that I struggle to walk and I struggle to use my hand, I think it's obvious in the way I move, but certainly when you first meet me, it's not apparent. And the difficulties can come with this in that, although I can't have sensation, my hand is hypersensitive to pressure. I can't do things like shake hands or like touch with like my right hand or my right leg, which can often come across as strange or unfriendly. And moreover, because it's not immediately obvious why I use or get the adaptations and accommodations I do, like you tend to get a lot of like comments or general confusion or unawareness of sort of what happens. There are like nerve palsy is only one of many disabilities that can be slightly or completely invisible, and so one thing I've become interested in is generally raising awareness and understanding of like the effects that disabilities can have, even if they're not necessarily apparent.
Dan, you're next.
Thank you. My name is Dan Bershinsky. I grew up in Georgia, and I'm a second-year MBA student at the business school here. I went to college at West Point, graduated in 2007, and was an Army infantry officer. And then in 2009, I went on my first deployment to Afghanistan, my first deployment total to Afghanistan. And I was wounded in combat. It's a pretty long story, which I'm happy to share. But we'll keep it short. But on this one particular patrol, I was leading my platoon of about 35 soldiers, and we were walking around during the daytime, came in contact with the enemy. I had a soldier killed right next to me, and then later that night, while essentially guarding that area to recover his remains, I stepped on the trigger of a hidden explosive device. So it's just a homemade bomb, like a fairly large landmine, you can think of it. And it immediately severed both my legs and tore up my left hand pretty bad, broke my jaw, and busted out both of my eardrums. Military medicine is really remarkable these days, and so I was on the ground bleeding to death in the dirt for over an hour, but the medics that were there with us kept me alive. I got on an Air Force rescue helicopter, which really cool little side story. There's a couple of units like this in the Air Force, and one of them happens to be California Air National Guard, based down at Moffett Airfield in Mountain View. And that was the unit on rotation in the summer of 2009 in Afghanistan that picked me up. So I've actually seen the second helicopter that was a part of my flight that picked me up lives down at Moffett Airfield right now. And unfortunately, the air crew was actually an active duty air crew, and I haven't been able to meet them. But I met some of the California National Guard guys who were actually up in the air that night that picked me up. So just an incredibly small world. So, of course, I survived the trauma. I got evacuated back to Walter Reed, which is the Army's big flagship in Washington, D.C., and I underwent pretty much 4 full years of full-time physical therapy. I was in the hospital for 4 months, just in a hospital bed for 4 months, and then I got out and I just started full-time physical therapy. And I've mentioned this offhand a couple of times in class so far, but I feel incredibly fortunate in the resources that I've been able to enjoy. It's quite unique, pretty much the best resources in the world. If anyone in this room had got injured, the same injuries that I had in anything other than a war zone as a U.S. soldier, you would not have been given the resources that I got. So say what you will about war, that's another topic we can talk about, I'm happy to discuss. But the one, probably the only good thing that ever comes out of war is that it's always pushing the medical frontier forward, which is really, really cool. So I did 4 years of full-time physical therapy. Way before I could actually walk independently, I got a wheelchair. I got a nice, small, lightweight one, and I figured out how I could get it and myself in and out of the car. And then I was just, driving around, because I've been driving ever since I was 15. And that was my big first taste of independence. And so I did rehab for 4 years, quickly realized, I'm not going to be an Army officer for the rest of my life. What do I want to do? And I was like, well, I'll go to law school, I'll go to med school, but those schools are very hard. And I was like, I'll just go to business school, which is not very hard. And I'll tell all you undergrads here, college is amazing. I didn't even go to normal college. I told my project partners about this a little bit. I went to West Point, great school, not a very fun social life. Make the most of what you can in college, but then everything you do after college is a million times better than anything you've done so far. Being out in the real world is really cool. So I got to come back from the real world, go to graduate school, which I actually consider to be this as like the last phase of my rehabilitation, because prior to grad school, I was a Army captain. I was getting paid a salary just to do rehab full time, and then I retired. I now live on an Army pension, which is quite generous, and my school here at Stanford is actually paid for by the VA, so I'm going to school for free. That said, I haven't had a real job since August 18th, 2009, when I got blown up in Afghanistan. Nothing that I consider to be a real job. I've worked on my own terms. I've started a small company that I'm going to work on very hard once I get out of B school. But I haven't really been responsible for anyone other than myself for the last 5.5 years now. So I'm looking forward to getting out of graduate school and moving on with my life. But this is the really first time where I'm away from Washington, D.C. I'm away from my peer group of other wounded veterans, guys who look like me and face the same challenges as me. And I kind of consider myself just being a little sneaky guy integrating with the rest of society. And so it's good to see, a greater peer group up here. I kind of just go about my life trying to live it as normally. That's a charged word, I suppose, but just kind of like the way I used to live life for the first 25 years before I got hurt. And that's really what my particular disability happens to be about. I got incredibly lucky in that my brain, as far as all the doctors can tell, is not damaged. I'm still not a very good student, but I wasn't a very good student before. But my disability is all physical, which I kind of think now as like a mature amputee, if you will. In the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter, but it's funny the way that, just little weights kind of chew at you and hold you back. I lived a very active lifestyle, again, kind of like school. I wasn't very good at sports, but I played a lot of sports. My job as an infantry officer, my body was a large part of my job. I had to be physically capable. I had to be able to jump out of airplanes, march for 10 or 15 miles, and then fight whenever I got there. So having the vast majority of my physical ability and independence taken away from me has been frustrating. And that's probably the biggest challenge that I face. At school here on campus, I live on campus. I lived here last year. I live here this year. The school was very generous to let me live on campus the second year, which isn't typical for business school grad students. And that's simply because even just living off campus, even though I can walk to a car, get in a car, park in a garage, and then sort of walk around campus, like I'm just slow and I can't go very far. And so the prospect of having to park in the garage and then walk across campus, you know, the B school's over there, I'm here in the engineering area right now, it'd be a huge pain in the butt. So Stanford was really nice to let me stay. I get around campus by using a Segway. When a Segway isn't the most appropriate, like when I'm walking a dog or something, I don't want to do it up high from a Segway. I just use a regular everyday wheelchair. I like to do triathlons to stay in shape. For swimming, thankfully, no equipment is required, which is really nice. Just pop the legs off, put on some goggles, and hop in and swim. But to bike, I use a hand cycle, so I just normal bicycle drivetrain. I just pedal it with my arms. And then to run, I run in a racing wheelchair like a paralyzed person would. And that's kind of the name of the game for everything. I've recently started playing tennis. I just take my regular wheelchair out to the tennis court and hit around. It sucks for that. I think I'm going to go and buy a tennis-specific wheelchair pretty soon, which will be fun. If I want to go mountain biking, there are, you know, wheelchair versions of mountain bikes. The reason I say that my disability isn't that big in the grand scheme of things is because everything's doable. It just takes equipment, which has a monetary cost to it, which is annoying, and then a physical space. I live in a studio over in Munger, and in my studio I have a regular wheelchair, I have a Segway, I have a hand cycle, and I have a racing wheelchair, and then I have a couple of spare legs in the closet. So stuff just takes up a lot of space, and you know, not everyone in this room gets to do it. So if you do have this ability, don't take it for granted. But like, I miss the days of being able to go on vacation, throw some running shoes in my bag, and just go. And that's all I needed to complete my travels in Europe or whatever I was doing. Go for a run. Yeah, I can go for a run now, but I'm not going to put a 6-foot-long racing wheelchair in my carry-on luggage. You know. So that's really the big challenges that I face. It comes into my personal life, and that sometimes walking on robot legs, being crammed into carbon fiber all day is very tiring. So business school, not a very hard school, but a very social school. There are a lot of times where my classmates, you know, something's going on and it's like, let's go have drinks somewhere in town. And yeah, I want to do it, but I don't want to go through the hassle of putting my legs back on. And during that, I don't know if my friends are going to want to walk around downtown. I can't do that. I can grab an Uber, I can bring a wheelchair, I can bring a Segway. There's always a solution, but it's just frequently I don't feel like putting up with it. And so that's just the one thing I guess that I really struggle with is some days I'm like, hey Dan, suck it up, get it done. And then other days I'm like, no, I'm just going to sit at home and watch TV. So I would say that's the way that I'm really limited. Thank you.
And last but not least, Alexander. I'll work this for
Cool. So hi, my name's Alexander. I'm a senior here at Stanford's studying STS. I'm in the Policy, Security, and Technology track. And my disability I've had since birth, actually as a, I was basically, while still in utero, my mom as a pedestrian was hit by a car that ran a red light. I had to be delivered 14 weeks prematurely because of that accident and wasn't delivered quickly enough, so lost significant oxygen to my brain and lost basically enough motor, the motor areas of the brain that would have been training themselves in utero to associate certain signaling mechanisms with certain muscular movement, and so I've had to retrain myself from a very early age to learn to walk. Technically, it's my disability is cerebral palsy with spastic diplegia, and so contrary to expectations by a lot of doctors in my early years, and thanks in a large part to my parents' perseverance and my dad and stepmom's perseverance in finding me good therapists and therapy options. I, rather than having to use a wheelchair in elementary school, and I mean, the most optimistic prediction from my early years was maybe walking by first grade. I was walking with a walker in kindergarten. And so it, unlike the rehabilitative context that has been talked about a lot in this class so far, I don't have a baseline to work towards. I'm just constantly trying to improve myself from, and so it's just a matter of figuring out the next goal to motivate myself towards. And so part of that is the progression in my assistive technology. If you could click the slide. Yeah. So actually two. So here's a couple examples of old assistive technologies that I used back in kind of my elementary school days that I haven't been able to bring in because I've long since basically graduated from them in my progression. On the left here is an orthotic that I used to wear orthotics on both feet to keep my left toe especially from pointing in and keep my knee from overextending. And so that was kind of annoying in the fact that I would always have to buy wide shoes, and so I would have to have multiple pairs of shoes with the orthotics and for the quick occasions when I wouldn't need orthotics, and it was tough to get my feet into my shoes often. Up in the upper right is a posterior walker that I used until the style of which at least I used until senior year of high school, when the distances on the high school campus were too large. And so it just helped with balance and being able to not be jostled in crowds. And then down at the bottom is a picture of me on horseback. I participated in what's called hippotherapy, and also therapeutic horse riding since I was 2.5, and until kind of the early part of my senior year of high school, when academics got in the way, and it was very influential in my development of muscle control and upper body musculature for balance and things like that. Next slide, please. My current assistive technologies are mainly my scooter that you can see over here, and you can come take a closer look after the panel's done here. And mundane as it may be, my laptop, just a normal HP laptop, is I use it for a lot of assistive technology as well, from searching for ebooks before I go to the bookstore to not have to carry the extra weight, to actually using a speed reading software, because I read slower if I have to actually move my eyes down the page and across the page, but I've found recently within the last year that I can use speed reading software where each word is flashed on the screen quickly, and just that the software sets the speed of my reading rather than my eye muscles and head movement, and so whereas I can do at best 200 words a minute on a good day without speed reading software, I can do 450 to 500 words with speed reading software. And so, next slide. I am really interested in how assistive technologies can become mundane and normal. Up in the upper corner there is a picture of an automatic transmission. I can drive unadapted, but I am legally disallowed from driving a car with a stick shift because I can't operate it reliably with my left leg, and so I consider an automatic transmission almost as an assistive technology for me, but it's one that's so mundane that I would expect most drivers in this room to never have used a stick shift before, and so I really think it's cool how technology that is just better than the predecessor can be assistive for everyone, and then down below there's a new company that showcased at CES just a couple weeks ago, looking to, I unfortunately forget their name offhand, but looking to build a scooter infrastructure for rapid charging of batteries in cities and popularizing electric scooters, and so I'm curious to see whether that might make things like my scooter just become more of a norm, and so it within a decade or two maybe, instead of bikes whizzing around San Francisco, you see a bunch of electric battery-powered scooters, and so another assistive technology is becomes normal. And yeah, you can come ask me questions about any of my experience. Something important that I always say to groups like this is I much prefer 100 bluntly asked questions than one question left unasked because of fears of political correctness or something like that. So, thanks.
Okay, well, I really want to thank our student group for being so open with themselves about their disability. And it's amazing, all have different backgrounds and different paths you've taken in life so far, but you're all at Stanford, and we're all that much better for it. So let's give our panel another hand. So if you want to, you please come down and talk to these folks, and I think Kartik may be able to show you his speech output on his computer, and we have Alexander Scooter here and Aubrey Scooter, and I should mention that, you know, I know Kartik and Aubrey, and they're amazing people. I mean, not because they're disabled, but, you know, they're just amazing people. And it would be good for you to know them even more. So, that's it. Oh, do you have a question, Fernanda?
I just want to make a statement. Six of you out there in the front, I know that in the life of disability, the word overcome is always mentioned, as if we're supposed to jump into a huge hurdle, and on the other side of that hurdle is supposed to be, wow, we're heroes for this, right? Well, I don't think I ever want to be jumping on the other side of the hurdle because it's constant process. And with the six of you in front of us today, in front of me, I am so admirable of your focus, because without your focus, each trial, each experiment, each naysayer, any one of that, you laid out the foundation that it's not so much you're going to prove it wrong, it's the spirit in you saying, but this is the way I am living. And that I really commend you to continue with your focus, your determination, and shift the perception of what's out there. As in the quote, beginning of the class, you know, it's our character that says who we are and what we are in this world. So thank you for all your stories, and I want to hear more as you do that.
Okay, thanks. So we'll close the class session, and I'll see everybody on Thursday, but please feel free to come up and talk to these amazing people.
Thanks to my